Today, we're going to explore how Buddhism helps us accept the natural cycle of life and death, guiding us toward a more peaceful relationship with these inevitable moments. This understanding can transform how we view our own destiny, bringing a quiet peace in the face of impermanence. Imagine a leaf clinging to a branch, swaying gently in the wind, ready to fall. Just as leaves fall in autumn and the ocean waves ebb and flow, life and death are part of an inevitable cycle. Buddhism invites us to observe this dance with a serene heart, showing us that life and death are not opposites, but interconnected steps in a continuous flow. With an open mind toward this perspective, we stop resisting the end of things and find beauty in each transformation. This way, we draw closer to a deeper acceptance of our own mortality, realizing that life and death are intertwined like the cycles of the seasons. From this understanding, a new path emerges, where the anxiety over endings is replaced by the tranquility of knowing we are part of something larger and continuous. At the heart of Buddhism, we find the concept of samsara, the endless cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Samsara is like a wheel turning, taking each being on a journey of continuous transformation. It's not simply repetition, but a flow that evolves, where each new life is an opportunity for learning, wisdom, and self-awareness. To illustrate, imagine the course of a river. Its waters flow through mountains, plains, forests, and deserts, passing through varied landscapes and changing with each bend. This journey represents the cycle of life and death, where each incarnation is like a new phase in the river's path, enriched by past experiences and challenges. Thus, Buddhism teaches us that our existence isn't limited to a single act, but to a long story of rebirths that propel us toward spiritual evolution. The vision of samsara helps us accept death as a natural and necessary stage. Each ending isn't an absolute end, but a transition, a turning point. In this understanding, death ceases to be a terrifying mystery, becoming instead a link in the chain of our existence. By recognizing this turning wheel, we come to see time and life stages as companions on our journey, distinct phases, but connected by a thread of continuity. In every aspect of existence, impermanence, or anatta, as it's known in Buddhism, permeates. Change is the only constant, and everything that is born, grows, and flourishes will eventually also pass. Impermanence isn't just a distant concept, it's something we experience at every moment, in the cycles of the seasons, in the blooming and withering of a flower, in the meetings and partings throughout life. This unceasing flow reminds us that everything, including ourselves, is transient. For Buddhism, accepting life's transient nature is liberating. When we deeply understand that nothing is permanent, our relationship with the world becomes lighter. Just as a tree sheds its leaves in the fall to bloom again in the spring, we begin to see losses and changes as stages in a larger process. This acceptance dissolves attachment and teaches us to appreciate each moment in its entirety, knowing it is unique and brief. However, accepting impermanence doesn't mean indifference. On the contrary, it's an invitation to live more fully and mindfully, valuing each moment and each being. Buddhist meditation practice leads us to observe the flow of thoughts, sensations, and emotions, noticing that everything comes and goes like waves in the ocean of the mind. And, in recognizing this dance of arising and passing, our perspective expands, and we find serenity even in the face of life's uncertainties and changes. At the core of the samsara cycle, the concept of karma functions as a natural law of cause and effect, guiding rebirth and the quality of each new life. In Buddhism, karma is not a judgment, but a chain of actions and intentions we leave throughout our existence, shaping the future. Every action we take, whether a gesture, a thought, or a word, carries an energy that reverberates and returns, like a stone tossed into a lake, creating ripples that affect what's around it. Imagine a fruit-bearing tree. The seeds we plant and nurture with care bloom and bear fruit. Likewise, our actions leave seeds that blossom in the present or in future lives. Practicing compassion, kindness, and respect becomes essential, as each ethical choice and empathetic act lays the foundation for a more serene and fulfilled rebirth. Understanding karma teaches us to live with responsibility and awareness, recognizing that, just as we receive what we leave behind, we also influence the cycle of rebirths. This view inspires us to cultivate a more conscious and generous life, focused on the well-being of all beings. The understanding of karma leads us to reflect on what we are leaving behind, realizing that each choice builds a path not only for the present but for the future. When we align our actions with intentions of peace and harmony, we generate a chain of positive transformation, nourishing not only our journey but the cycle of life and death that surrounds us. For many, death awakens a profound fear, a worry about ceasing to exist and losing everything we know. In Buddhism, however, the practice of maranasati, or contemplation of death, offers a different perspective. Instead of avoiding the thought of the end, we are encouraged to reflect on it with a calm and open mind. This practice invites us to think about mortality, not to increase fear, but to dissolve it, understanding that death is merely another stage in the natural cycle. Alongside maranasati, Buddhism also presents the concept of anatta, or non-self, one of the central ideas of this philosophy. Essentially, anatta teaches us that the notion of a fixed and permanent self is an illusion. Just as a river isn't made of a single drop but of a flowing collective of water, our identity is a composition of thoughts, experiences, and moments that constantly change. Realizing this absence of a fixed essence helps us let go of ego and identity, understanding that the self doesn't end because, in truth, it was never a solid, unchanging entity. By accepting that we are like a passing flame that fades to give way to others, we find a way to see death with serenity. The end of individuality becomes, then, a return to the whole, an integration into the vastness of existence. Buddhist practice helps us overcome the fear of death, not through promises of immortality, but by showing us that in the fluidity of life and death, we never truly cease to exist. This understanding leads us to a deep peace, where we can release our attachment to the self and embrace life with a transformative lightness. At the heart of the Buddhist path, Nirvana represents the ultimate destination, liberation from the cycle of birth, death, and rebirth. Nirvana is the extinguishing of suffering, the moment when the flame of desire and attachment goes out, allowing the mind to awaken to an absolute peace. For those who reach this state, the wheel of samsara stops turning, rebirth and suffering cease, and the self dissolves in the harmony of full existence. The path to Nirvana is guided by the Four Noble Truths and the Noble Eightfold Path, the central teachings of Buddhism. The Four Noble Truths lead us to understand the nature of suffering and the causes that sustain it, while the Eightfold Path provides practices that guide the mind and heart toward a life of balance, ethics, and wisdom. Through the practice of compassion, meditation, and mental clarity, we follow this path toward liberation. Nirvana is not a place to reach, but an experience of complete freedom, where the illusions of ego and attachment dissolve like morning mist. For those who awaken to this reality, death loses its power, and life, in all its impermanence, is revealed as a field of serenity and fulfillment. By understanding Nirvana, we begin to see the cycle of rebirth not as an inevitable burden but as a chance for spiritual growth until ultimate peace is attained. When we deeply understand the cycle of life and death, our mind finds a state of serenity. Buddhist practices teach us to cultivate a peaceful, detached mind centered in the present moment, where fear of death and anxiety for the future give way to full acceptance of the now. By adopting this view, we come to face life with gratitude and approach death with tranquility, seeing it not as a loss but as a natural transition. This peace arises through practices like meditation and mindfulness, which help us observe our thoughts, feelings, and fears without identifying with them. Like a cloud passing through the sky without leaving a trace, our worries lose their weight when we stop clinging to them. The mind, then, becomes like a calm lake that reflects life's beauty and accepts, without resistance, life's inevitable changes. This perspective not only removes the fear of death, but also transforms the way we live. Every moment becomes an opportunity to appreciate life in its fullness, to extend compassion to ourselves and others, and to cultivate a heart that is free and light. In Buddhism, this acceptance of the cycle of life and death leads to an inner harmony, where we stop fighting the inevitable and learn to flow with it, finding serenity in every stage of our existence. At the end of this journey, we realize that Buddhism offers more than a philosophy, it is a guide to a life of peace and understanding. By accepting the natural cycle of life and death, we are led to see existence in a more compassionate and serene way. Buddhist practices and teachings remind us that, just as leaves fall and rivers follow their course, we too are part of this eternal flow, where each beginning transforms into an end, and each end makes way for a new beginning. As we move toward full acceptance, the anxiety and fear surrounding the idea of death begin to dissolve, allowing us to live with greater lightness. Each moment is appreciated, not as something to grasp onto, but as a fleeting gift, filled with beauty and meaning. As we continue our journey, Buddhism encourages us to look within ourselves and recognize the cycle of rebirth as an opportunity for growth, learning, and compassion. And as we integrate this wisdom into our hearts, we find a peace that sustains us in the face of impermanence and feel in harmony with the natural cycle of life. May each of us walk this path of acceptance and awakening, finding serenity and fulfillment in every phase of existence.